All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Lani Cupchoy, and we are here on behalf of Chapman University. And this class is Education 570, Pedagogies for Social Change. And today what you're going to be seeing are projects, right? Students were supposed to develop a lesson plan project based on any topic within their particular field, grade level that they're interested in teaching, right? And so they're supposed to design a social justice centered lesson plan of any choice. And part of the work was to incorporate, virtual field work or some element, right, that connects online, students to online. And basically it's about getting teachers, forthcoming teachers, to think about how they would teach social justice in the classroom, right? How would they address the isms, racism, classism, or sexism, right, et cetera. And just how would they encourage students to think a little bit more about these topics, but also engage in the material, right? And so you're going to see works by students, their flavor, their thoughts, their style, right? And it could be philosophies, it could be, you're going to see different styles, meaning whether it's elementary, right? Or whether it's going to be intermediate or high school, right? You're going to see different forms, right? And these are the styles. These students have been working on this since the beginning of our session, right? We actually have a nine-week session here. And so without further ado, what I'd like to do is go ahead and we're going to start out with Cassidy, who's going to go ahead and take it away for us.
Hi everyone, let me share my screen. Can everyone see my screen? Perfect. Okay, so my topic is about racism, more specifically racial injustices and equal rights in poetry and how it's connecting to our current society. So the essential questions that we're really formulating around my lesson is, what is racism, who perpetuates it, and what do I need to participate in an open and honest conversation about racism and privilege? So the lesson is intended to be for 9th to 10th graders. It will be taught over several periods, specifically in English or language arts class. And I wanted to teach this lesson because I don't want other students to feel othered or marginalized because of their skin color. So what we're going to be doing in class is the lesson is going to be starting out with students collaborating in groups and discussing racism. They're going to contribute words, definitions, or personal experiences that they've had with racism. And then afterwards, they're going to watch a short YouTube video discussing racism and what the next generation can do. And the video is right over here. And I really like this video because it incorporates people from different countries that speak different languages and how they perceive racism and how they've dealt with it in their own lives. So the next thing that we're going to be doing is actually a field work, and it's the implicit bias quiz. And students will take this quiz to reflect on any implicit biases that they may not be consciously aware of. It's a really simple quiz. You just push the keys E and I to respond to different images or phrases. And it's really interesting because there was a saying that said, if you have a brain, you have a bias, which is one of my professors previously said. So after the implicit bias quiz, we're going to be reading a poetry packet that they're going to be reading in groups and discuss. So these are poems that I have specifically picked out that discuss racial injustice in our current society as well as in the past. And then in the groups, they're also going to determine the main ideas of the poem and reflect on it as a group. So for example, right here, I have the If You Tell It Backwards poem, which is about the school to prison pipeline system. Afterwards, after the poetry handouts, are going to be doing another field work, which is a virtual tour of a poetry museum where students will take part in browsing the online poetry museum, and they can take a self-guided tour where they can move their mouse around and it'll take them to different rooms. And then the last thing is an exit ticket where they're going to write their biggest takeaway from the lesson and summarize what they learned. So from the mock lesson plan, which we did a few days ago, I ran my implicit bias quiz. And from there, I actually found out that it takes a lot longer to run my implicit bias quiz than I had originally thought. So I modified my lesson to make it run over multiple class periods to give students appropriate time to complete the quiz and discuss their results. And something that my group was telling me is that it's important to let my students know that the results are not always 100% accurate. There is always room to change their misconceptions and rework how students think, because these results are not shaping who they are as humans, because a negative result does not mean that you are a bad person or a bad student. And then these are the standards that I chose. And then I think my lesson incorporates and brings out these standards because students will be recognizing the stereotypes of groups of people, specifically people of color as represented in like the poetry handouts and the YouTube video. And then students will also be determining the central idea of a text and examining its development through the poetry handouts and group discussion by exchanging different ideas and their unique experiences or beliefs. And that's my presentation. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Cassidy. Snaps, all that good stuff. Appreciate it. Wonderful work. All right, let's move on to Esther.
Alrighty, hi everyone. I did my lesson plan on women in classical music. It's going to be based for high school music programs, specifically either vocal programs, instrumental, or just general music classrooms. So the objective and the inspiration behind this plan is specifically because for a lot of classical music, it's going to be taught about men and what men have done for classical music. Women are rarely talked about just due to the time period when classical music really came up. Women were really kind of focused on being the childbearers and the home takers. So this lesson plan specifically focuses on like the sexism of music and how a lot of females are not represented within our music history books and the music that is most commonly played. And these are just some screenshots of my actual lesson plan, mostly the introduction part of this lesson. So this is my opening activity. It changed recently from what it was from my praxis a couple days ago. So the opening activity will basically be me playing these pieces for my students. These are super well-known pieces, whether or not you're musically inclined or like not super musically inclined. They're used in commercials and half times and all these things. And it's a range of like opera, which is all the way on the left, and like major works, which are the two on the right. So these will be played and students will kind of talk about, have you heard these? Where have you heard these? And these pieces are obviously from male composers. And then these ones are a little bit less known because they are from female composers. And the idea is that no one will really recognize them, again, because they're not from male composers. So I will be playing all 6 of those videos, just snippets. And then the main question will be, what do you think made the music from the first slide famous? And then what makes the slide in music in the second slide not as famous? And hopefully you'll kind of get to the point of like, oh, maybe the composer had something to do with it. And then they'll kind of see that these are all the composers from the second slide. All great music, just unfortunately not recognized as much because of the time period and unfortunately their gender. So for the field work, a lot of it is going to be YouTube based. I would love to actually bring them to see a female conductor or a prominent female performer to actually see them in person, but obviously right now not possible. But the great thing about YouTube is like there's videos everywhere. So this will be the first video that will be shown because it's the most recent. Just an African American prominent composer, conductor conducting for the I think it's like the German Philharmonic or something like that. But she's doing great work, and she gets a lot of news coverage now. So she'll be the first one that we talk about. And then these are other fieldwork examples. It's just like a ton of performers and conductors, and there's also a ton of composers they can talk about too. Just a lot of them. And again, the inspiration is just because I feel like during my whole undergrad career, and even when I was doing music in high school, we rarely did pieces done and composed by women. So it's super important for females to see that they have a place in classical music, especially since our voice is generally the one that's preferred in like the singing. There's so many roles for females. They need to see that they can do more than just singing these beautiful pieces. They can write these pieces, they can conduct them. And this whole lesson will be taught as a summative assessment. The whole point of this will be, I will present on my favorite female composer, Clara Schumann, and then each of my students will pick a female, either in history or current, that has contributed to the musical field, either as composer, conductor, or performer, and they will then teach the class in kind of like a presentation style. And then all of these PowerPoints or however, whatever they decide to do will be turned into me. And then a unit test will be given based on all the information that was taught. And again, the social pedagogy goals is just to bring women up in classical music and show that they did important things, talking about gender roles and how it affected even classical music today. These are the standards addressed. And the practice feedback was originally I was going to do just name some composers, but not every student knows the names of composers right off the top of the head. So it's easier just to hear and recognize pieces, which is why I switched my activity over. And that is my presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Yay, excellent. Thank you, Esther. Appreciate it. Snaps. All right, let's go ahead and move on to Kinsey.
Okay, everyone. So my lesson is based on Martin Luther King Jr. and his many achievements. And the lesson kind of dives into the true meaning of what an equal and inclusive society and community should look like. The target audience is first grade. And I was inspired to write this lesson plan for different amounts of reasons, but when I was first looking, I looked at the standards originally, and there was a first grade standard for celebrating holidays and learning about why we celebrate them. And I saw one for Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, and I thought that tied really well because he's known for all of his civil rights stuff and racism, and the students can learn a lot of good vocabulary terms. And then also we learned about Martin Luther King Jr. even in elementary school, we probably all remember. So this was kind of a good opportunity to kind of get a head start on a lesson plan like this. So my lesson plan is broken into 2 days. The first day is 55 minutes total. The opening is just activating background knowledge, asking a series of questions. And then after that, I'm going to front load vocabulary for the lesson, and they're going to learn social justice, civil rights, gender, segregation, racism, and activism. This lesson covers a large variety of vocabulary words, especially related to social justice. And then they're going to look at a PowerPoint of MLK, his achievements, and then they're going to look at major events that happened during his leadership. And then they're going to be given timeline worksheets or maybe on Padlet or Jamboard. However they prefer to work, they can keep track of the events. And then after, they're going to write in their journals, and they're going to have to give the date of an event and then one or two key details from the event. And then after, they're going to learn about Rosa Parks, and she was responsible for the Montgomery bus boycott. And then they're going to watch a brain pop video. And then after, they're going to do a true or false whiteboard quiz. So they'll be split into teams, probably 2 groups. And then they'll just answer out using their whiteboards. And then for that closing, they'll do a 3-2-1 activity about what they learned that day. And then the second day, the opening is looking at photos from the National Civil Rights Museum, which is actually located in Memphis, Tennessee. It looks really awesome. I researched it online, and it would be somewhere awesome to hopefully go someday and visit. But students can look at the pictures from the museum and be like, hey, we learned about that yesterday, and kind of just activate their background knowledge again. Then for the virtual field work, they're going to be looking up his I Have a Dream speech, as we all know about, and they can look it up online or they can listen to an audio recording. I thought the audio recording was good too, because you can kind of hear the sincerity in his voice and how awesome that whole environment was when he was giving the speech. And then lastly, and then they're going to make a Flipgrid video identifying 2 dreams that Martin Luther King Jr. mentioned in his speech or a central message they took away. And then for the exit ticket, they're doing an I Have a Dream statement. And they have to identify something or one way they would be activists within their own community. And we go over the term of how MLK was an activist beforehand. And then this is a review of my mock trial. I decided to run my virtual fieldwork. So I had the members in my group look at and read the speech. And then they told me like 2 dreams that Martin Luther King said in his speech. And then I also had them do the exit ticket that I have a dream that. And since we're on Zoom, I had them do it as a PowerPoint. So they just copy and pasted the slide. This is Jordan's. He's been a rock star this entire time. But one of the things he says is, I have a dream that students will be treated equally, and students' work will be graded based on engagement and willingness to try instead of just academic intelligences, which I thought was super awesome. And then how this achieves pedagogy goals, I was really inspired because while researching, this lesson usually just ends in the classroom and students aren't usually taking away from it. And what I see this is moving beyond the classroom. And the key word I would probably choose for this lesson is activism, identifying how MLK was an activist and then putting that into our own classroom and how they can be activists within their own community. And I overall had an awesome time doing this, and I hope I can share this someday. So thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Kinsey. Wonderful, wonderful work. Okay, let's go to Joanna.
Alrighty. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Joanna. I am doing my lesson plan project on, drum roll please, on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I would hopefully one day I get to teach social science, specifically 11th and 12th graders about this amazing topic. So this is just a quick snippet of my lesson plan. The education standards are clearly stated in the beginning. The materials needed, one thing I remember from my practice, I need to make sure that computers are provided for students who don't have that access. So that's important. My virtual fieldwork consists of 3 main YouTube videos. And I have a copy of like a Google Doc that I could share with my students for comprehension questions about those, about the virtual fieldwork. The objectives are stated above right here. The activity in total would be about 95 minutes. This is just one period. I kind of chunked it out into 15 minutes for a crash course video. 20 minutes, we'll have group discussions, and then so on and so forth. So to go into more depth about my lesson plan, it's about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict intended for 11th, 12th grade students. What I really want my students to understand is just the entirety of the conflict and how it all began. Not only they'll understand the historical aspect of it, but they'll also understand the current events that's been going on, as well as how the United States as a third party is involved and how, from an outsider's perspective, it's how they view it, how they view the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The inspiration behind this lesson plan is that many people view or classify this conflict as something a little bit different. So for example, the United States media portrays this as something just a little bit different than what it is. One example would be the portrayal of Palestinians as a bad guy. They're the bad guys, but in reality, as a Palestinian myself, it really pains me to see how majority of the United States views them as such, when in reality, they're the victims of this conflict. So before teaching my lesson plan, I will definitely make sure that my students have the appropriate and necessary materials before for class. I will hand out a Google Doc, or if we get to have the opportunity to go back to school, I will hand out my students just paper copies of the questions that are needed for each videos. So the lesson consists of 3 videos chronologically ordered to start off with the history of the conflict, the United States' role in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, as well as the United States' portrayal of that conflict. I'll first use like an opening activity. It's just a basic question of whether students have prior knowledge about this conflict. So the 13-minute video that I will first present is a crash course video that John Green does a very swell job in explaining the historical background of the conflict, and students afterwards will have approximately 20 minutes to share their answers in class and to discuss with one another. Then the second video is a shorter video. It's 5 minutes, and it discusses how the United States is involved and how they got involved, which is through just, they portrayed Israel as a strategic ally because of, they're selling them military weapons and all. So after that video finishes, students will have 15 minutes to discuss their answers with the rest of the class. Once that's over, the final video that I will be showing by the end of the day portrays America's perspective on the conflict. And what's different about the group discussion afterwards is that yes, students will discuss with one another about the questions, but what's great about it is that they'll also kind of talk with one another to create real world solutions, or just hypothetical solutions to addressing a real world problem. So the social justice pedagogy goals, my students will recognize, describe, and distinguish the unfairness and injustice at the different levels of society. And they'll also explain the short and long-term impact of biases, words and behaviors, and unjust practices, laws, and institutions that limit the rights and freedoms of people based on their identity groups. And my lesson plan is what I want my students to have or to take away from this lesson is to have a well-informed knowledge, have that well-informed knowledge about the conflict, and to really understand the difference between the political views and how America views the conflict, to the point where it's just like, okay, well, now they get to critical think and find out, okay, well, I'm gonna find real world solutions that could potentially help end this conflict. Yeah. And for my praxis, I ran the second part of the lesson plan, which addresses mainly just the US role with my group. It went pretty well. The feedback that I received from my peers was just, again, to make sure that my students have access to Chromebooks, and that the questions are given to students prior, and that maybe I could possibly add more into my opening activity and kind of scaffold that question leading from the historical aspect to US role to US media and how those are all related. And yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity to share.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Joanna. Appreciate it. Okay, let's go with Claudia.
Hi, so this is my U.S. immigration policies. It's 11th grade social science lesson plan. So here's the table of contents. So I will teach this lesson in the middle of a week-long immigration subunit during the much larger unit of the United States rise to power in the 20th century. The lesson looks in depth at the immigration policies in the United States during the rise of power in the 19th and 20th century. The lesson plan also includes researching and reading policies and examines the social and emotional impact these policies had on groups of people. So here are my standards. I have the social justice standards and the history and social science standards. I chose this, the inspiration I chose this for is that in the past and in current age, we have seen policies by federal and state acts that discriminated against multiple people. And I want students to develop the skills to examine government policies and federal acts such as Immigration Act of 1924 and the Chinese Exclusion Act. Through this lesson, students will be able to identify from primary sources what unjust practices are seen within US immigration policies that we have been studying. And this lesson will help students develop their skills in researching and reading laws and policies from a federal and state level to provide them necessary skills when it comes to time for them to exercise their right to vote. So here's the lesson plan overview. I will start with a higher order thinking question or a hot question. How can federal immigration policies affect different groups of people? The students will be put into different groups, small groups, so that they could read the Immigration Act policies, an excerpt from On Gold Mountain, and a video. In those same groups, the students will reflect on what they noticed from the policies and the videos. And then the students will be given a series of photographs that they will now analyze, and a series of questions that they can will help their analysis. And at the end of the photo analysis, one student from each group will share out to the class the consensus of the general thoughts of those pictures. And then the exit ticket will be a closing question of specifically how did immigration and integration laws and policies affect this immigrant group. And so here's my activity. And from the praxis, the feedback that I received is that make sure the photographs are large enough for the students to be able to see if I'm using it on presentation, and still for worksheets, make sure they're large. If I'm doing presentation, just to share one question at a time, but I have all the series of questions written for this activity. I'm going to keep the citation source at the bottom for students to use it as an explicit source that they could read, while implicit questions such as what did you notice about the objects or people in the picture, and what can you tell me based on the observations, those are implicit questions to draw from the video from the picture rather than the citation source. The virtual resource that I have is Angel Island Immigration Station. It is historically relevant to this lesson plan. It provides students connection with the past because they have poems and letters from immigrants. It provides a 3D model of Angel Island so the students actually feel like they're traveling there. And it also has a free online tour guide for the students to follow, and they describe what it's like to be an immigrant at that time coming through and the experiences they had. Thank you so much for listening, and have a good day.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Claudia. Appreciate it. All right, Taylor, you're up.
Hello. Okay, let me get my. Okay. So hello, everyone. My lesson plan is Unity in the Olympics, and the intended audience is for 3rd grade. This lesson plan, this is like a clip of it, but I have my learning goals, and the learning goal is for the students to understand that unity can be shown through an art piece while collaborating with peers. So the final piece is they're going to be working in a group together to create their own flag that represents unity. And these are my content standards, my materials needed, and the learning objective is by the end of the lesson, students will understand that unity can be shown through art by working, collaborating as a team in small groups. Everyone has to contribute to at least one idea on a final flag art piece representing their definition of unity. And at the end, students will demonstrate their understanding by explaining to the class how their flag represents unity. And to start off the lesson, I'll give a sticky note to each student and have them write their definition of what unity means to them. And they can write a word, a phrase, a sentence, and they'll put it on the whiteboard. So all the sticky notes will be on there, and we'll have a discussion on that. And then I will show them an Ed puzzle video on what the Olympics ring mean, and that these 5 rings represent these 5 parts of the world coming together to participate in a global event. And so they'll answer these questions throughout the video, and we'll have a discussion on that. And then to close the opening, I will have them look at one of my PowerPoints I'm going to have that talks about the art activity that they're going to do. So the art activity will consist of making a unity flag in groups where everyone has to contribute. So after the PowerPoint, I'm going to show them a video on how to create their own flag to give them a visually understanding model. And then, to make these groups, I'll pull out popsicle sticks to make it fair. And I'm gonna have at least like 4 in a group. And then, so once I've called out the groups, they can go into a specific area where they can concentrate and work, and I'll give them all the materials they need to create this flag. And I'll be walking around and helping them, guide them if they have questions and anything that they need. And so once they've finished making their flag, at the end, they're going to discuss how their flag represents unity. And so to determine what groups go first, I'm gonna have whoever wants to volunteer first. And then I'll go around and I'll start picking out groups. And then after the end, they're going to do a peer self-assessment on what they contributed to the art activity. And this will allow me to get an idea of who contributed to the group, and it will also have them get a chance to assess their peers and how they did. And then, so this is my virtual field work. They're going to go through a tour on a museum. It's the US Olympic and Paralympic Museum that was premiered at the 2020 exhibition. And it's really cool. There's a video and it shows you each room and the history of the sports and the awards. So I think it was really interesting. And this was also one that I found where it's a coloring activity where you can pick different colors and color this image. And I thought this was a really important image because it shows hands coming together to hold the Olympic torch, but instead of the torch, it's a globe. So I thought it was a perfect way to show unity. And then my mock trial run. So I did a Jamboard of what does unity mean to you? And this was some of my group responses. Coming together for a common goal. Unity is the idea of coming together as a group or team and working with others for the same outcome being one. And then this was some of their coloring activities that they did. And then how does this lesson plan achieve social justice pedagogy goals? It teaches students that nationalism takes place in the Olympics and how the main purpose is to maintain peace and unity among the nations. And then this was one of the content standards. It teaches students to connect to others and know how to talk, work, and play with others, and even when they disagree or they're different. It teaches students to include others and work together to achieve a common goal. And also it teaches students how different countries come together to celebrate their different cultures through sports. And the reason why I chose the Olympics and the inspiration is because I love sports and I grew up watching the Olympics. And I also know a former Olympian who was on the softball team, and she led her team to win the gold in 2004. And she won the silver with her team in 2008. And it was really cool because when I was younger, I got to catch for her because she was a pitcher and she was super fast and it was hard to catch her, and it was really cool and experience. So yeah, that's my lesson plan.
All right, excellent, excellent. Snaps. Thank you so much, Taylor. Okay, and then Julia, you're next.
Can you guys see my screen? All good. Okay, perfect. Okay, so the lesson plan that I chose to do is on mindfulness, and it's geared toward the special education population, particularly second grade. And this lesson would ideally be part of a broader mindfulness unit. So here are my content standards. These include a health standard regarding managing emotions, a literacy standard, and then a social justice standard. And here are my lesson objectives. So by the end of the lesson, students will be able to recognize their feelings and explain at least 2 strategies to help them by managing emotions appropriately. And that relates back to the health standard and then also the literacy standard. And then our other objective is students will be able to articulate themselves so that they may be empathetic to others' feelings. And that relates back to the social justice standard. So to open the lesson, I would perform a check-in, and this is kind of similar to what we do at the beginning of this course. And this just will allow the students to know that as a teacher, I care about their feelings. And then it'll also give the students that practice of identifying their emotions. And this will also strengthen social emotional learning and empower student voice and reflection. So here is an example of a check-in chart. And then here is a picture from my mock trial. Obviously on Zoom, we can use the emojis, and then in person, we could point to something on the chart. So then we would cover the scientific power of meditation, which I actually have a video on as part of my virtual fieldwork. And we would just cover the effects of meditation on the brain. And then I would also present this image and dive a little more in depth as to how exactly meditation affects the brain, particularly just breathing and how that contributes to mindfulness overall. So before the activity, I would have students record their emotions and feelings on either a Padlet if it was virtual or a physical sticky note. And then after the activity, I would have students do the same thing regarding how they felt during the exercise as well as after in general. So this would allow them to kind of reflect and use that literacy standard as well as that health standard again. So from my trial here were some of the responses before, and you can see a lot of people felt stressed out, anxious, overwhelmed. And then after we performed the breathing exercise, you can see people felt more at peace, more relaxed, and just a lot of mention of how you only had to focus on the breathing and not anything else going on. So that's an example of an in-class reflection. So what I would change after running this in class, I would model the breathing exercise first, just to demonstrate how you could do it seated, standing. I would also demonstrate different ways to share on Padlet, maybe using multimedia forms, like uploading pictures, as well as just reflecting with words. And if I had time, I would also have the students discuss how their feelings can affect others and just how breathing in general can kind of affect the way they treat others, the way they treat themselves. And then I would also allow the responses to be anonymous, just that way people can truly reflect, and that kind of limits that fear factor. And then for an activity, I would have the students all create their own breathing cues chart. So this is just an example. And also during this, I would mention how mindful coloring really just gets the brain off of thinking of other things. And then this would also be something the students could have with them at all times. They could bring it home just to practice that breathing. And then in class, we would discuss the relationship between feeling and being felt. So I have a little definition right here, and it just says to feel felt is the feeling that someone else recognizes, acknowledges, and understands your emotions. And then each student, if this was the full unit, would have a mindfulness definition that develops throughout the unit. So after each lesson, we'll kind of add on to their own personal definition. And this just allows students to recognize and manage their emotions and feelings, as well as promote self-awareness and empathy. And my inspiration for this lesson is just how our own well-being and emotions can affect how we treat not only ourselves, but also others. And I really believe in a holistic approach to teaching. So just teaching to that whole child. And mindfulness isn't traditionally taught in school. So this kind of challenges that notion. And it also includes those who are more at risk and those dealing with these barriers that need that attention just to mental and emotional states. And that is all I have for today. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Julia. Okay, let's go with Monica.
Hello, friends. Give me 1 second to share my screen. Can everyone see my screen? All right. Okay, perfect. So my lesson plan for today is social class. It is comparing social class, specifically the Romanticism era versus present day. This is my table of contents and what we'll be talking about. The overview for my presentation is this lesson plan is designed for an intended audience of 9th grade English class. Students will focus on the Romanticism era as a starting point to discuss wealth, social economic class, and privilege. From this base, students will then evaluate and compare modern day social class. The overarching essential questions for my lesson plan is, does wealth hold the same value in our current society as it does, or as it did during the Romanticism era? And how does wealth affect social class? I have 4 main features in my lesson plan. The first one is a crash course, Pride and Prejudice Part 2, which is a video on YouTube. It discusses money and how it affects social class during the Romanticism era. It talks about the Pride and Prejudice book. I will also have a handout of character names and their titles, their associated wealth for the students to take notes on. The second activity is The Great Dalmoody. It is an amazing card game. I would split my class into groups. This game teaches them about social class and how you can move up and down through it and how difficult it is to move up and down through it. The third activity is our crash course, Impacts on Social Class. This is another YouTube video, but now we're transferring over to modern day and present day. So this is social class and how it might be different from Romanticism era, and I will provide a graphic organizer for them to take notes on. The last part is my field work, and it is Spent. It is an online game and it stimulates a month in poverty. So you're trying to keep a job, you're paying for rent and essentials, and you're trying to survive until your next paycheck. It's a very interactive game where your students get to make the choices. I will run this game twice. The first time they will not really know much about it. We'll discuss on what they noticed and how many days they lasted in those 30 days. And then I will have my students try again. This time they will know what's going on. They might even strategize how to play. And then we'll talk about what was different than before. The essential questions that I have for this, for each part are listed below. It includes like, how do decision and actions and consequences vary depending on your perspectives? What extent does power or lack of power affect individuals? What is oppression? What are the root causes? And how can a person's decision and actions change his or her life? Some peer feedback that I had from my mock lesson plan example that I did a couple of days ago. Some problems that occurred was that I didn't have many places for students to write down their thoughts. And so adding graphic organizers was something that I definitely needed to add. I tried to combine all 4 activities into one day and it was definitely not enough time. And the order that I had it in was not conducive to learning and class discussion. So some solutions I came up with is making sure that I provide my students with some note-taking strategies and graphic organizers to write down takeaways and stuff like that, that'll be useful for them for class discussions later. Separating my lesson plan into 2 days instead of 1 and changing the order. This is kind of what it would look like. On day 1, we would watch the Pride and Prejudice video. It's about 15 minutes. We have partner and class discussions, and they will have a handout with a character breakdown. The second part of day 1 is the Great Dalmoody card game. It's a max of 30 minutes. You will model for your students. I started with a group of 7, but it can be adjusted to your class size. On day 2, you have Impacts on Social Class. A max of 15 minutes with a partner discussion and a graphic organizer for note-taking during the video. And then the last part is the end of day 2, which is Spent. It's about 30 minutes. Students will play 1 round and then discuss. Students will play the second round and then compare. These are the social pedagogy goals that I came up with for my lesson plan. My first one is students will differentiate and speak on privilege, their own bias, and come to understand the points of view of others and their struggles. This falls into our literacy standard, which is initiate and participate effectively in a range of collaborative discussions, and being able to express their own ideas clearly and persuasively. Goal 2 is students will come to understand the disparity between upper and lower classes, the imbalance of power, and how hard it is to change social class through the use of the Great Dalmoody game. This corresponds to Justice 12, which is I can recognize, describe, and distinguish unfairness and injustice at different levels of society. And my final goal is students will recognize privilege and understand the struggles of poverty-stricken people. They will compare their own lives and make meaningful connections. And this corresponds to Justice 14, which is I am aware of the advantages and disadvantages I have in society because of my membership on different identity groups, and I know how this has affected my life. I think it's very important for students to really see their own advantages and disadvantages, especially and where they are in social class, because it really determines how their life is now and how it will continue. It's also important to let them know that this can change and you can move forward and up and down the social class ladder. But as a reminder, no one can pick where they're born, what social class they're born. Thank you.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much, Monica. Appreciate it. Okay, let's go with Rihanna.
Hi, everybody. One moment. So I decided to do my lesson plan on food deserts. A food desert is an area that is lacking access to a grocery store. And unfortunately, this is disproportionately affected to people that are part of low-income communities or people of color. And this serves as part of my inspiration for this lesson, as I recently learned about this term and the communities that are living within a food desert and the different issues that arise from that. I noticed the intersections of racism and classism in this issue, and I thought it would be a great way to expose our students to those types of issues and how they turn up in our society, in our lives. So this lesson would start off with a self-reflection. Students will be asked to think about how they obtain their food within their own circumstance and culture, and then think about how that would have been changed if access to that would not be there. This could lead to a discussion on health issues, but also time and money. And then we would talk about people that are actually living within a food desert. I would show them videos of people that are currently living there and what they're doing to make sure that they get their needs met. Through that, we would also talk about the causes and consequences of food deserts, which could lead into a discussion of classism and racism. Although I intended this lesson plan for 4th grade, this can definitely be adapted for older grades, and you can really dive into these different causes and consequences. As part of this lesson and leading into my final assessment, the students will be asked to do their own research. In my mock lesson, my peers did suggest that I offer these students resources that they can use, and if they wanted to, they can go and find more resources to use in their research. So 2 of those resources would be food desert statistics that I've compiled into a document, and then a link to the Food Empowerment Project, which is an organization that is currently aiming to help people within food desert communities. And they have lots of resources on their own website talking about this issue. So students can do their own research in groups or pairs or independently if they'd like to. And after doing their research, they can go back to the personal reflections that we did in the beginning of class and think about how that changes their circumstance or how it would affect them if they were living within this community. Following that, we would look at the United States Department of Agricultural's food desert locator, and students are able to go onto this link and actually find a food desert that's within our area. After looking through that and thinking about our previous discussions of these different causes and consequences, we're going to brainstorm some solutions that we feel we can implement. And through that, we will have a call to action. I will ask students to think about some of the people that we could reach out to that could help us in serving these people in these communities. And so through that, we would write a letter where they can reflect on everything they've learned. They can define what a food desert is, name a specific community that is in need of our assistance, identify a cause and a consequence that people in the food desert are living with, and then we can talk about a solution that we've brainstormed together. I've planned for this lesson to go over 5 days, so for probably 1 school week, but it would be a great opportunity to extend this lesson. If in fact we got responses back from these individuals, we could maybe explore, okay, how can we engage with this more and take it even further? This lesson achieves social pedagogical goals because it turns the power back onto our students. Although this is something that I have chosen, a topic I've chosen, it gives them the tools to be able to serve as an activist in things that they're passionate about as well. It shows them how they can conduct their own research, how different things in our world are affecting other people, not just them, and then how they can actually make a change. And that is it. Thank you.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Rihanna. Appreciate it. Okay, next up is Jasmine.
Hi. Let me see. I did my lesson plan on income inequality, and it is intended for 5th grade. Oh man, can you see my screen? Okay, there we go. Oops. Okay. Some of the learning goals will be students will understand that their value of money is different from others, and they will learn what contributes to income inequality, such as social class, gender, race, and they will learn more about that further on into the lesson. These are my standards. I incorporated social justice. So I know that life is easier for some people and harder for others based on who they are and where they are born. And then they will reflect on that with reflections embedded into the activities they're going to do. And then I also incorporated math. So doing all the operations of math with decimals, which is great for learning about money and wages. Some guiding questions that I will ask throughout the lesson in their reflections through Padlet, small group and large group. What is your value of money and how is it different from others? What is income inequality and what contributes to it? And I will introduce this lesson. This will hopefully activate their background knowledge of money and how much they spend. And I will have them post on Padlet their favorite food to eat. So thinking about one meal and then finding a restaurant that has it and researching the price. So this will be a mini research activity. They will post the food and the price. This could be with pictures, names of foods, where it comes from. They could add a little bit of information for that just to share. And in their journal, they will be predicting what minimum wage is and how many hours they think it would take to pay for that meal. And then I took it a step further and had them take the perspective of maybe a single mother, single parent, single guardian taking care of a family of 4. So that was just a prediction before I gave any explicit instructions. So during my explicit instruction, sorry, I will provide the information on minimum wage, the history of it, why it was produced, and then during their independent and shared research, that's during the introduction. And I will provide spending summaries so they could learn how to read the graphs that I provide and interpret that information from it. They will do basically a chart of high and low income and what each group spends the most money on, like housing, rent, who spends more on housing and rent, food, health, insurance, all of that. In small group discussion, they will reflect together. I wanted to do small group discussions just so it's more intimate. This way they gain different perspectives on what each person views the value of money as. And partner discussions, taking it a step further, combining their ideas, posting on Padlet so everyone can see. And then their final reflection will show the progression of their value of money. So as they learn more about minimum wage, what other people live through, and how it changes how they view their wages and different wages. So the math standards that I'm using the operations for decimals, they will calculate the wages of minimum wage income and a higher income. So in this case, I put 200,000. And they will be calculating how long it would take to feed each family. And obviously the higher income, it wouldn't take as long to make the amount of money to feed their families. So that's the point I'm trying to get across. And then for the virtual fieldwork, I found a video on YouTube and I incorporated some questions just to monitor their learning about income inequality. So this video has the history, a timeline, what contributes to income inequality, and it gives great information on that. And then I had another activity sorting these careers or jobs from lowest to highest paying. And this will give them an idea of real life jobs, maybe their parents' jobs, just ideal jobs that they know of, and sort them in order just to get an idea of the discrepancies between each job and how much they get paid. And then this is the research that I will provide them. They will make that chart to compare how much each group spends on living, and they will sort them by needs, essential needs, and what they want. And then the social justice standard that I'm incorporating is incorporated into my objectives. So in the language arts, I will have them write their opinion piece, which is their reflection, their final reflection, and they will give 2 examples on an argument of how life is easier or harder for some people based on their identities. And then they will use the math standards to calculate their evidence. And then in my mock lesson, I noticed that it would be more beneficial to have those discussions in between the activities, just to reinforce what they learn, using different modes to communicate, like Padlet, written, if they want it more personal. Feel free to post, and then, yeah, that is it.
All right, thank you so much, Jasmine, appreciate it.
Mhm.
Okay, Snap, sorry. Let's go with Michael.
Okay. Sorry, I'm on a tablet, so I don't know how well it'll work. I think I might be having a little bit of trouble. Can I log on my computer?
Sure, and you want me to skip to the next person, then we'll circle back with you? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank
excellent.
you.
Okay, no worries. So let's go ahead and we'll go to Emily while Michael is working out some technical difficulties.
Let me escape that really quick. Does everyone see it all right? Yes, awesome. Alrighty. Let me just move you guys off to the corner just so I can see what's going on. Perfect. So my lesson plan is on identity and discrimination. The target grade is going to be 2nd grade. So my inspiration for choosing identity and discrimination was actually a culmination of things, personal experience, but also the experiences that we've had this semester with classes. First of all, the otherness project presented in class like really got to me of how different yet similar we all are to each other. My own personal teaching philosophy of teaching students to be respectful to others inside and outside the classroom. I see the classroom as a way to introduce values to students inside so then they can take them to the rest of society. It is a miniature version of the rest of society. We also did an I am poem for EDUC 569 that I really connected with. And then I just really wanted to address some of the topics of racism, sexism, religious discrimination. So lesson plan overview. It would begin with a group read aloud of Where Are You From by Yamil Said Mendez. And then the basis of the book is this little girl continues to be asked, where are you from? Where are you from? And I thought this book would be a good book to begin with for the entire lesson because it is a question that all of us have probably heard at least once in our lives. And some of our students will definitely be hearing, especially with their different cultural, or religious, or ethnic backgrounds. So it will begin by having a class read aloud. During that class read aloud, we will have a class discussion of the main character's feelings and connect it to students' feelings and experiences. During the read aloud, I'll have a few stopping points and ask, have you ever felt this way? Like, can you give me an example? Connect it just to have the students that have felt this way feel recognized. It will also lead to an introduction of the words identity and discrimination. Although those are big words, introducing them at that young of an age will help them understand how to be better about supporting and glorifying their own identity and others' identity and minimizing discrimination. The activity that we will do is students will create an I am poem on paper or seesaw. I think it's important to offer students different modalities to explain their projects. So for students that may not be as eloquent reading and writing, they can also just speak it out loud or use pictures, and then they can still be included in the activity. The virtual fieldwork is going to be an anti-discrimination video for kindergarten through 6, and they will complete that on their Chromebooks, and they will have an ed puzzle video, meaning that there will be stopping points where I will have questions for them to answer. And then at the end, they will present their I am poems to the class and wrap up the lesson with class discussion of treating others that are similar and different with kindness and respect. So the resources we have here are going to be the book, Where Are You From? By Yamil Said Mendez, and the anti-discrimination video. The book by Yamil Said Mendez also comes in a Spanish version, which is De Donde Eres. And I think that's important to provide both examples to students so they can understand they are different identities. And then it will also give an opportunity for our Spanish speaking students to feel noticed and validated in their second voice. The anti-discrimination video on the right, the basis of the video is it's a town of orange people and they're all orange, and then Mr. Blue comes along, like this little blue boy comes along and he doesn't fit in. So then that begins also the topic of discrimination, and that was what I submitted for my plan, but we'll skip that. So how does the lesson plan achieve social justice pedagogy goals? So the standard I chose was the social justice standard. I know everyone has feelings and I want to get along with people who are similar and different from me. So I think through this lesson plan, students will gain a better understanding of their own unique identities and the unique identities of others. The combination of resources and activities the students participate in will encourage students to get along with others who are similar and different from themselves. I'm a big advocate on teaching students something inside the classroom that they can also take out into the world and be good citizens. And I think teaching them this idea of acceptance and being aware of discrimination and being proud and celebrating your own and others' identities will help them become more accepting of others throughout their life. So how would I teach it? So it would be a lesson over a series of 3 to 4 days. So day 1, we would read the book, Where Are You From? And begin the I Am poem. Day 2, we would finish the I Am poems and then continue on to day 3. We would continue having the conversation, and then students would go on Chromebooks to watch the video by themselves. And then the students at the end of the lesson will present their I Am to the class. And we will go over as a class how we choose to positively treat others. I think it's important to have students do their own activity, but also to bring it back as group discussion so we can talk about it as a whole. So we will have group discussions before, during, and after our first reading when we introduce the I Am poem. And when I introduce the I Am poem, I will write on the board my personal identities and to introduce them to how their range of identities should be valued as well. For example, I will write down like, I am Salvadorian, I am from California, I am a runner. So all the different identities that make me to introduce it to them so they can feel comfortable going off on their own and writing one. And then we will also have a discussion after after all of the students have watched the video, just to go over as a class, like the larger vocabulary word that they learn in there of discrimination and how do we address it. And if we've seen it happen to us or if we've seen it happen to our classmates and what we will do from there forward. And then we will present the I Am poem presentations just to kind of acknowledge and celebrate the diversity in our classroom. So for my mock lesson, we did watch the video, and then so along the way, I stopped and asked the students questions at key points in the video. How do you think blue feels? Do you remember a time when you felt like blue or someone else being treated like blue? And then so the students that completed the mock lesson plan with me, they felt emotionally moved by the video. You could see their expressions kind of being sad and shocked and being like, oh my gosh, did they really say that? So I think that's important to evoke emotion and then just kind of start that discussion of like how we feel and like how important our words and actions are. And then one of the takeaways I took at the end, the orange person wears like a blue jacket to be friends with blue, but one of our colleagues said, just be aware to also discuss with the students, you don't have to wear their clothing or you don't have to be exactly like them to relate and respect. And I said, okay, like that's an interesting take and I will take that into consideration. And I believe that is it.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Emily. And we'll circle back now to Michael. Michael, are we ready?
Hopefully.
All right.
All right, so I'm gonna go directly into my PowerPoint kind of, instead of showing the lesson plan, and just because of the Wi-Fi. So my lesson plan basically uses the gender and then the lower socioeconomic representation in brass instruments. Originally, this lesson plan was going to be a bigger unit plan, just to introduce to 9th and 10th grade beginner musicians. And so then I decided, let's cut it down even more and let's get into the finer details of it. So with this project, with the first one, I incorporated some of these pictures from online, and the activity is showing what French horn sections or brass sections in major orchestras used to look like. And as we continue on, we go to the next slide, and it looks similar. And then we look in the back, and my teacher is there, and it's a female and a minority of that as well. We move to the next slide, and we show another major orchestra, the Berlin Philharmonic, with the very first female French horn player and the very first female in the brass section of the orchestra. As I continue on, we get into the gender, or the minorities and the lower socioeconomic representation and minorities in there. And so I, of course, use not just brass instrumentalists, but I use woodwind players. On the left, we have Lizzo. And if you know Lizzo, she plays the flute. And then on the right side, we have the New York Philharmonic principal clarinetist who came from a lower socioeconomic area. The next part of the lesson has to do with how much brass instruments actually really cost. Just to put it into comparison, from what my group helped me with, is that a pair of Nike shoes average is $70. So if you look there, we have the different price ranges for trumpet, French horn, trombone, and tuba. And it just shows you 5 pairs is worth $400, 17 pairs is worth $1,200, and then tuba, 42 or 43 pairs of shoes is worth $3,000, and that's just the lowest base model. And the last part, to help the students out with being able to have access to those instruments because they're in a lower socioeconomic area, I provided nonprofit organizations for those students. The first link that we have here is called hungryformusic.org. They are based out in Washington, D.C., and they will send an instrument to any student that needs it worldwide. The last one has to do with the LA Philharmonic, and they provide also instruments for youth who want to get interested or who want to get started in orchestras, and that's for them. So my lesson was just involving those different aspects of the representation, with whether it be gender, minority, and then people of a lower socioeconomic area. My inspiration for this was just because I myself am a minority, but I wanted to also incorporate my passion for music and my love of the instrument that is with that. Um, and then the pedagogical part of it is to help reach to those students who may not think that they can achieve it because of their status, and to help provide that for them and say, hey, this is for you. This is for you to help you to succeed. You know, we're here, we did it, and whatnot. And that is my whole thing.
All right. Thank you so much, Mike. Snaps. Okay, let's move on with Maddie.
Can you guys see my screen? Okay, perfect. Let me go to the top here. Okay, so let's see if it'll load. So my lesson plan is about who am I, and it's made for second graders to kind of establish more knowledge on their cultural identity. And so this is quick overview. I'm going to go over the overview of the lesson plan, why I chose it, social justice component, and then the praxis. So the lesson objective in the lesson plan that I have is, like I stated, for children to get to know their family and cultural background through an oral history interview to strengthen their own cultural identity. And so it's really going to have 4 different parts in it with the lesson. So they're first going to start with the who am I activity, which is the praxis that I did with my group. And the students are going to do an activity where they either use 5 words, sayings, or pictures to describe who they are. And then this will be followed by watching a video about identity and the importance of cultural identity, and then a video where other kids around the second grade age talk about their cultural identity. And then it will go into making interview questions. So the children will watch an interview, and then after this, they will take part in like picking out what it takes to make an interview. And then they will come up with questions on their own that they can go home and ask their parents. And then the next part is them going home and asking their parents the questions, taking notes, recording it if possible. And the last part is the classroom discussion, where they'll come back the next day and they'll share what they learned at home with their partner and the information that they gathered. And then they will choose their 2 favorite facts from what they learned, and the partner will choose 1 fact from the other partner's presentation that they learned, because at the end of this, they're going to be putting this information in a final video along with a family timeline and the history of their cultural identity, so a research aspect as well, and that they'll ultimately share with the class. And so why I chose this topic. So I chose this topic because it brought back the idea of otherness for me, because ultimately when I was thinking about it, people are often othered because of things that have to do with their cultural backgrounds from what everybody shared in the class. And so I feel like it's important for students, especially from a young age, to have a strong sense of identity. And this will also allow them to learn about others' identities. And then the social justice aspect, it's the social justice standard I chose that goes with it is that I know and like who I am and can talk about my family and myself and name some of my identity groups, because at the end of the day, that's all I want for my students to be able to do, to have the confidence to be able to articulate what their cultural identity and the groups that they belong to and their family means to them and plays a role in their life. And then the practice I did was the Who Am I activity. And I had this plan to be in person in my lesson plan. So I kind of had to alter it to be online for this activity. But so I did the Who Am I, and they could do 5 pictures or 5 words to describe themselves. And then after we brought it back and kind of talked about it, and I gave everybody a chance to verbally describe what they chose. And so this is an example of one of the students. And then here's the next one. And here's the last one. And so what worked about it is I found it was a really good activity to learn more about my peers. Therefore, it would be a good activity in class to learn more about my students and for them to learn about each other. And the discussion time was really important because it allowed for them to clarify things, because back here, like on Julia, she put a picture of Friends, but she didn't actually mean the show Friends. She meant like her friends and family at home. So it gave time for them to clarify those ideas, and it was fairly straightforward for them to understand. And then a few things that I would change about it is I would give them more time. That was something I kind of struggled with when doing it, was figuring out how much time to give them. As I said, I would rather do it in person, because then the pictures would be their drawings, allowing for more creativity. And but if I had to do it in Jamboard like I did, I would go over how to add drawings and pictures and things like that, because some people didn't know that until the end, until we went over it. And so, and then another thing I would think about doing is possibly giving them an example to show them on a different topic on how to do it, so then they have a view on how to do it, but it won't influence their ideas. And then yeah. That's it.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Maddie. Okay, and finally, last but not least, Marek.
I'm having a little bit of trouble. Give me one quick second. Oh, there it is. I'm going to share my screen. Can you see my screen? Okay, great. My lesson plan is, it can be quite flexible. It can be a month-long series of lessons, so it can be done minimum 3 days. The first has it's a two-pronged lesson. The first aspect of it is critical historiography and ethnography for social justice. In other words, social science research, critical social science research for social justice. And then on the other hand is the concept of children studying themselves. In other words, children studying history of children. What's going on with my computer today? There it is. Okay, why? Understanding one's positionality in society is a radical stance. And I got that from Bell Hooks, actually. I have this: in teaching to transgress, Bell Hooks argues for teachers to embrace subjectivities in the classroom. Well, this is one way of doing that. What better way to do that than to guide children into research that allows them to have a more informed subjectivity of the self through a process of collaborative research with their peers? The motivation or inspiration for this, I mean, this is a topic I've been researching for years. So this is kind of like a snippet of the motivation for me. Of all social groups in the society, children are the ones who experience a level of disenfranchisement that forces other stakeholders, teachers in this case, to advocate for them, and this is very central, to empower them to advocate for themselves. And how to do that? Through research, through getting to know themselves, getting to study the history of how society has perceived them, has conceptualized them, and has constructed them as members of society. This is the lesson plan, and these are kind of like the objectives that I have. It's a lesson plan for 5th graders, and it is intended to teach students a few things. Again, it can be reduced to 3 days or expanded significantly to encompass a few weeks. The value of reading history critically, to draw inferences from it, to collaborate in research work with their peers, to acquaint themselves with historiography and ethnography as tools of social science research, to develop an interest in children's history, to better understand their positionality as children, and to grow in their sense of agency. I think it's kind of clear where I'm going when it comes to social justice here, but I'll elaborate a little more further. Field work. In terms of field work, students are going to put into practice some ethnographic tools like interviews, observations, and going out there and trying to make sense of what they see. They will be doing field work in the playground, trying to understand how kids interact, how they play, and then the idea is how do we understand that? How do we make sense of what we observe? That's one aspect of ethnography. Students will practice group research. All the work will be done as a group. All the research and all the data will be shared with the whole class for use by anyone. That's very central to this whole plan of the idea of collective self-awareness in this sense. The students will also do on their own some reading of a book. I will show you in a bit what book it is. It's a book by Howard Zinn, The Young People's History of the United States. And they will annotate, they will learn to annotate the book with references to children. The book is a history of the US, but they will have to identify the areas where they can draw inferences about the history of children too. These are the materials that I had. The first one is a video. It's a 10-minute video of the history of the jobs that children used to do. Then the book. Then there's an article with the New York Times, which is very recent about parenting, which I thought was very significant because it can show the change over time of how things were constructed in the past in relation to children and how it is now, which has changed quite a bit. And then, of course, the interviews and the field notes. This is just snap shots of my lesson plan. I'm not going to go into it because I have all that in different slides. How would I teach this? I would divide it into, this would be like a 4-part lesson, right? It would, the first thing that I would do is I would allow students to begin a discussion based on the readings and the video first, before they start their own research, before they start their own ethnographic work, before they start their own critical historiography on their own. So they will start with what I provide them. In this case, the 4 items that I showed you in the previous slide. The outcomes are very basic. A paragraph, they can choose to write it by themselves, or they can choose to write them as a group, 2 or 3 students as a group. They can they will carry out a mini ethnographic project in the school's playground, as I mentioned earlier. And this is central, actively participate in building a communal wall of knowledge where everything will be shared with everyone. These are the content standards. I'm not going to go into them because I have a few more slides. Oh, well, actually, briefly, I have social justice standards, and I also have literacy standards. Literacy mostly in terms of drawing inferences and conveying direct, clear messages when writing opinion pieces or research pieces. Historiography for social justice. Why? Critical historiography is the practice of learning the trade of history writing in order to understand why we know history the way we do. This lens helps us in seeing made invisible aspects of history and reach critical conclusions that can move us in the direction of activism and social justice. And now ethnography. Ethnography is the practice of critically observing our surroundings and attempting to explain the observed social phenomena aided by theory and participatory praxis. These tools of social science research is a powerful tool of self-empowerment and also for the production of knowledge. One of the last few parts. How this lesson achieves social justice. By critically studying the history of how their society has conceptualized and treated children and drawing inferences and deductions from it, students can begin to question in a more informed way their position in relation to the rest of society, learning that their informed opinions are valuable, that those opinions can constitute applicable knowledge or self-awareness, is a practice that they can then use to help make changes to their own lives. It is a form of self-empowerment that transcends the classroom. This is a little bit of the initial series of activities that I have planned for them. I'm not going to go into them, but it's basically the idea of doing the research that the teacher gives you before you start your own. Talk to the oldest members of your family, find out what their lives were like when they were kids, ask them about the toys, the games they played, whatever. Just gather all the information you have, read what is provided, and then you begin your own research into whatever you want. Is it work that kids used to do? Is it schools? Is it toys? Is it clothing? What is it? It's up to them. And that's all I have. Thank you.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much, Rick. Appreciate your presentation. We have just a little bit of time left. What I'd like to do is let's go ahead and open it up really quick to the whole class, right, for feedback, comments, maybe about, the presentations that you saw, right, especially for those folks that aren't presenting today, right, because today is a part 1, right, of part 2 of the series, right, but for those folks that didn't present today, we'd like to kind of hear from you, a couple comments, about your thoughts, and also as you're seeing, is this in your mind, the way in which we can kind of challenge traditional, right, curriculum and kind of bring in fresh, new, innovative ideas. Rhea, what do you think?
I was just gonna say, I really appreciated how everybody everybody found something that they're personally interested in, and it's really obvious, and I could see it through your presentations. It was very clear. Those of you that are into music are clearly into music, and I love it. So I appreciate the hard work that you guys are putting in.
Thank you so much, Rhea. And anybody else want to chime in? We'll take Claudia and then Stephanie.
I really like the kind of attention to who your students are. You all have a future perspective of your students. You have an idea of who your students are, and you really want to connect with them by connecting yourself with them. So I really appreciated that future perspective that you all had.
Excellent, thank you. And Stephanie?
I thought it was really interesting, kind of going off of what Rhea said, how everyone was so passionate about what they were talking about. I also found it really interesting. I don't know, for me, my topic that I'm going to present on tomorrow kind of just popped out to me when we started talking about social justice. So it was really interesting to see everybody else's take on it. I really enjoyed Rihanna's presentation about food deserts. That's something I never would have thought about teaching my students. So it's really cool to have this environment where we can collaborate and talk about different lesson plans on things that we can possibly be teaching in the future as well.
Excellent, thank you. And Ashley?
I really liked how the elementary school presentations were adding vocabulary to younger students, and that's something that's normally not taught in schools right now, but everyone is making such an extra effort to kind of normalize it and bring that into the classroom.
All right, excellent. Any other final comments before I formally close at least part 1 of our series? Well, I actually thought everybody did an amazing job, right? I think it's not easy, right? Not only just designing, but working this out, right? Creating these lesson plans, and of course you can see a lot of the heart that's behind it, right? You can see there's a lot of thought behind it. There's definitely a lot of research, and then the praxis component, right? Trying to see, how this would kind of really realistically play out, right, in a classroom setting. So I want to thank each and every one of you, of our presenters today. Thank you so much, you know, for really putting a lot, not just effort, but just really laying out beautiful presentations. It was very, very well done. And of course, today is just part one. Tomorrow we'll continue, and I'll be posting that link up as well. All right, thank you so much on behalf of Education 570. Thank you to everyone.